Imagine the scene. It's 4:00 p.m. on a Friday.
Oh, a dangerous time for a pitch.
Right. But you're in a conference room, or maybe a massive Zoom call, and the energy is just high. Someone has just pitched this massive new idea, a total moonshot.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a spontaneous product launch or a total rebrand or some company retreat to a remote island. Everyone is nodding. The CEO is smiling.
The reality distortion field is fully active.
Exactly. The marketing team is basically high-fiving. The momentum is intoxicating. But then,
There's always a but then.
always, there is one person in the corner, and they are not high-fiving. They aren't even smiling. They're just staring at a spot on the wall, looking, honestly, slightly physically pained.
I know exactly the look you mean.
Right. And finally, they raise a hand and ask the one question that just sucks every single molecule of oxygen out of the room. They say, have we considered that the regulatory framework for that island changes in exactly 3 months?
And just like that, pop, the balloon bursts.
The mood completely crashes. And what does everyone in that room think? They think, oh, here we go, the Department of No.
The wet blanket.
Buzzkill.
Yes. But today, we are going to challenge that exact reaction. We are doing a deep dive into a really fascinating stack of reports from the Max Energy ME80 assessment system.
It's a great system.
It really is.
Mm.
And specifically, we're focusing on a profile they call the Risk Watcher, or the code is FFWN.
Right, the FFWN.
And the argument we're unpacking today is pretty radical. It claims that person in the corner isn't a pessimist at all. In fact, they might actually be the most vital person in the room.
It's a complete reframe,
Mm.
because we usually mistake that caution for negativity. But the Max Energy literature argues this isn't about being, down on an idea. It's about a high-functioning, sophisticated scanning system that sees disasters way before they actually happen.
So our mission for this deep dive is to get inside the head of the Risk Watcher. We are going to dismantle that buzzkill stereotype, figure out how their brain actually works, why they can be exhausting to be around sometimes, because they definitely can be.
Oh, absolutely. But also why, if you're a leader, you probably need to double their salary.
Or at the very least, stop rolling your eyes at them when they speak up.
That would be a good start. But before we dissect the Risk Watcher specifically, let's zoom out for just a second. We're basing all this on the Max Energy ME80 system. For anyone listening who isn't familiar, what is the 30-second elevator pitch on this system?
Sure. So think of the ME80 not just as your standard personality test. It's really an energy management system.
Meaning what, exactly?
Well, most tests just tell you what you are, right? Introvert, extrovert, a thinker, a feeler. Max Energy actually maps out how your energy flows. It tracks the electricity, so to speak, from the exact moment a stimulus hits your brain, moving through your emotional processing, and finally to how you act in the real world.
So it's looking at the mechanics under the hood?
Exactly. It's about the internal engine.
Okay, got it. So within that system, we have the FFWN, the Risk Watcher. Let's start with their identity, their core definition. The source report has this hero section with a quote that feels, honestly, surprisingly dramatic for a corporate profile.
It is dramatic, but when you understand them, it's very accurate. The core declaration is speaking alarms before risk crystallizes into disaster, stopping loss at its genesis.
Stopping loss at its genesis. That implies they're catching things way before they even become real problems.
That is the defining key. Most of us just react to problems. The server crashes, so we fix it. The client threatens to sue, so we call the lawyers.
Yes, we put out the fires.
But the Risk Watcher operates in the future tense. Their primary psychological drive is the anticipation of what the report calls consequence structures.
Consequence structure, that sounds like engineering talk.
It basically is. Think of a structural engineer walking into a beautiful, brand new hotel lobby. You or I walk in, and we see the chandeliers, the marble floors, the nice carpet.
Sure, the aesthetics.
Right. But the Risk Watcher sees the load-bearing beams. They don't see the paint, they see the stress points. If they spot a hairline crack, their brain instantly simulates the entire collapse. It's not that they want the building to fall down.
Obviously not.
But they physically cannot unsee the structural flaw.
Okay, so their control mechanism is this global view based entirely on stability.
Precisely. Their control philosophy is built on long-accumulated judgment experience. While the rest of the world is purely focused on momentum, go, 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 the Risk Watcher is hyper-focused on imbalanced pathways.
Imbalanced pathways, like what happens if things tip over?
Exactly. They're constantly asking, if we go incredibly fast over here, what brace over there?
I see. But here's where I have to push back a little bit. Because I've worked with people who seem to fit this profile, and sometimes it just feels like they are purely anxious, like they're just worried about everything under the sun. How do we distinguish between someone who's just a nervous wreck and a genuine risk watcher?
That is the million-dollar question, and the source material draws a very sharp line there. This is not about generalized anxiety. It's about evidence.
Is it?
Yes, it's a rapid calculation of past patterns and current data. To them, or to us on the outside, it might feel like they're just having an intuition or a gut feeling, but it's actually a massive database query running in the background of their mind.
So when I say, hey, let's launch this new product next week, and they immediately say, we absolutely can't, they aren't just trying to ruin my weekend.
No, not at all. In fact, for a true FFWN, it is a deeply moral issue. The report explicitly calls it a professional and moral commitment.
Wow. Moral.
Yeah, if they see a risk and they stay silent, then the launch fails. They feel personally responsible. They feel like they betrayed the entire team by not speaking up.
Man, that is a heavy burden to carry around the office. Let's look at how they actually process that burden, because the Max Energy system breaks this down into an energy matrix. And there are 4 specific layers: IP, IQ, EQ, and manifestation. This is that technical engine under the hood you mentioned.
This is where it gets really fascinating. This shows the actual flow of the river.
Let's take them one by one. First is the IT layer. The report calls this the inner value layer. This is the fuel tank, right? What is actually driving them?
For the FFWN, the fuel is inner responsibility. It isn't ambition, it's not a need for connection, and it certainly isn't a drive for fun. It is this deep, foundational impulse to be the steward of the system.
The steward. So that's the key turning the ignition.
That is the impulse that starts the car, yes.
Okay, so the engine starts running because they feel responsible. Then the energy moves to the second level, the IQ layer. Now, normally when we hear IQ, we think logic, math, standard intelligence tests. But Max Energy defines IQ as the emotional activation layer.
Correct. In this framework, the IQ layer is the radar system. It's the early detection mechanism. For the risk watcher, this radar is tuned entirely to intuition and rapid judgment. It constantly scans the environment for anomalies.
Anomalies, like a glitch in the matrix.
Exactly like that. Imagine a risk watcher walking into a warehouse. They don't just see stacks of boxes. Their radar pings instantly. That stack is leaning. That forklift is moving way too fast. That fire exit is blocked.
And this happens automatically.
Completely automatically.
Yeah.
Before they've even had time to form a conscious thought about it, the radar has flagged it.
Okay, so the radar pings. Alert, alert. Then the energy hits the third level, the EQ layer, the decision calculation layer. What happens there?
This is where the emotional weight really kicks in. The report describes this as emotional sensing and resonance.
Resonance. What are they resonating with?
With the consequence. They don't just know the stack of boxes is leaning, they literally feel the potential injury of it falling on someone. They resonate with the future pain of the mistake before it even happens.
Oh my God, that sounds exhausting, to feel the pain of a broken leg that hasn't actually happened yet.
It is incredibly exhausting. But that resonance is exactly what forces them into action. They aren't arguing with you about a cardboard box.
Yeah.
They are arguing to prevent a tragedy that they can already feel in their gut.
Which brings us finally to the fourth level, the manifestation layer. This is the output. This is what we, the colleagues sitting in the meeting, actually see and hear.
And this is the great paradox of the FFWN. You would think, with all those internal alarm bells ringing and all that future pain they're feeling, they would be running around the room screaming, "Fire!"
Right. Panicking.
But they don't. The manifestation is defined by restraint and correction.
Wait, they get quieter?
They get tighter. They clamp down. Their energy output becomes a holding action. They'll say, "Stop. Wait, let's check this." They don't explode and expand the energy of the room. They actually contract it to bring everything back under control.
They operate with measured action.
Exactly. Measured action.
Which perfectly leads into a specific inner trait that the report highlights: risk before opportunity. This feels like the ultimate friction point in any business. Most businesses are completely built on selling the opportunity. Look at the upside. Look at the growth.
And the risk watcher is constitutionally incapable of looking at the upside until the downside is entirely secured.
Give us a real-world example of how that plays out. Let's say at the office.
Okay, let's go back to that company retreat scenario. You pitch a location, a beautiful rustic lodge up in the mountains. The optimist in the room sees the amazing view, the team bonding, the fireside chats.
I mean, I'm sold. Let's book the tickets.
Right. But the risk watcher hears the word mountains And immediately their radar scans. They're thinking, what are the weather patterns in November? How accessible is the main road? Is the Wi-Fi actually stable enough for the CEO's investor call on Tuesday? Are there any emergency medical facilities nearby?
And when they bring all that up, I'm just sitting there thinking, why do you hate fun?
But they don't hate fun.
They just sound like they do.
I know, but their goal is actually to ensure the fun isn't interrupted by a massive blizzard and a total lack of internet. They're doing a real-time risk inventory. They are establishing protective buffers prior to the decision.
So their internal logic is essentially, we can only truly enjoy this retreat if we know for a fact the ambulance can reach us.
Precisely. And the funny thing is, once they have solved the ambulance problem, they will probably be the first one at the hotel bar having a drink.
Really?
Yes. But that they cannot relax, literally, physically cannot let their guard down until that consequence mapping is fully resolved.
Now, this sounds incredibly valuable, obviously, but also it sounds pretty dangerous for their own career trajectory. Because if you are always the one pointing out the lack of ambulances, eventually people are just going to stop inviting you to the meetings.
And that brings us to their shadow blind spot. The report calls this shadow caution outpacing rhythm.
Meaning they fall out of sync with the rest of the band?
Yes. Every business operates on a certain rhythm. Ideation, decision, execution. If the risk watcher's warnings become too frequent or just too granular, they break that rhythm. They start seeing risks that are, frankly, statistically negligible.
So they get stuck in analysis paralysis.
Or they induce it in everyone else. And the truly tragic part of this, which the source material really highlights, is the personal toll this takes on the risk watcher themselves.
How so?
Because they end up caught in this brutal oscillation loop. First, they push really hard. They say, this is dangerous, we must stop. But the team ignores them because they want to move fast. So exhausted, the risk watcher collapses into concession. They just say, fine, do whatever you want.
Like on your own head be it.
Exactly. But here is the catch. They don't actually mean it. They still worry. They are still carrying the entire weight of this inevitable disaster, completely alone.
Wow.
It's a very lonely place to be, believing you are the only person who sees the cliff edge, while everyone else is just happily dancing towards it.
That really frames the quiet person in the meeting in a totally different light. They aren't disengaged or bored. They might just be overwhelmed by a sense of impending doom that literally no one else is acknowledging.
That's exactly it.
Let's talk about their social style then, because as we noted, they aren't usually the loudest voice in the room. How does the report classify their social interactions?
The report describes their social style as gating rather than leading.
Gating, like a gatekeeper.
Think of a massive castle gate. Most of the time, the gate is just open. People come and go. The risk watcher is generally calm, very pragmatic, and perfectly willing to stay in the background. They let the loud extroverts do all the talking. They really don't need to be the star of the show.
Until the enemy shows up at the gate.
Right. When a genuine threat appears, a terrible clause in a contract, a massive safety violation, that gate slams shut. And it slams shut hard.
I have actually seen that switch flipping people. It is jarring. The person who hasn't spoken a single word for an hour suddenly leans forward and says, absolutely not.
And in that moment, they do not care about being liked. They care about being right. They prioritize respect for their judgment over any kind of social popularity. They don't need you to like them. They need you to be safe.
Which is a really tough trade-off to make in a corporate environment. Let's pivot to the practical application of all this. If I'm a CEO or I'm building a new department, why do I actually need an FFWN on my payroll? Because honestly, they sound a little high maintenance.
They are high maintenance, but they're undeniably high value. The core business value they bring is risk forecasting and structural protection. But there's a really important nuance to this. It's about their translation skill.
What exactly are they translating?
They translate vague unease into concrete process. You know, sometimes you look at a project plan and you just have a bad feeling about it.
Sure, just a gut check that something is off.
But you can't build a reliable business strategy on a CEO's tummy ache.
Car point.
The risk watcher takes that vague feeling and they find the actual data. They look at the 50-page plan and say, the reason you are nervous is because paragraph 4, clause B, creates a massive liability loop if the vendor defaults.
Ah, they put language to the fear.
Yes. And by putting language to it, they make it solvable. They turn fear into discussable risk inventories. They turn anxiety into standard operating procedures. They systematize safety so that the survival of the company doesn't just depend on luck or one person worrying.
That is a huge distinction. They aren't just worriers, they are system builders. So where do we actually put them? If I have an FFWN employee, in which fields do they naturally thrive? The report actually lists some specific recommendations, right?
Yes, it does. Obviously, risk management, internal control, and audit. Those are their absolute natural habitats. You want your auditor to be naturally skeptical. You want them actively looking for the cracks in the foundation.
You definitely do not want an optimist auditor. Oh, I'm sure the numbers are close enough. Looks great.
That would be a total disaster.
Yeah.
You also want some in quality assurance and compliance governance. Someone has to actually read the terms and conditions. Someone has to ensure legal adherence and check the actual regulations.
What about outside of strictly corporate roles? I think medicine and engineering were also on the list.
Yes. High responsibility domains with very low fault tolerance. Think about it. If you are going in for complex brain surgery, do you want a surgeon who is pretty sure they sterilize the instruments? Or do you want a risk watcher who rigidly checked the tray 3 separate times?
I want the risk watcher every single time.
Exactly. If you were getting on a commercial airplane, do you want the aviation engineer who manifested success and focused on the upside? Or do you want the FFWN who relentlessly stress-tested the wing bolts for 10,000 hours?
Point taken. We often mock the boring, rigid safety people right up until the moment our life depends on them.
That's the great irony of this personality type. We deeply resent the brake pedal until we are careening toward a brick wall.
So, bringing this all together, the report has a summary, a sort of gold sentence that wraps up the entire existence of the risk watcher. What is it?
It says, when warnings are understood as protection rather than obstruction, the risk watcher can operate steadily.
Protection rather than obstruction.
That is the fundamental mental shift that you, the listener, need to make. When that person speaks up in your next meeting, they are not trying to block your path. They are trying to build the guardrails so you don't fall off the path entirely.
It's really about trust, isn't it? Trusting that their underlying intent is good.
And trusting that their radar is properly calibrated.
I want to leave everyone listening with a provocative thought here. Something that really stuck with me while we were reading through the source material. We live in a business culture that absolutely worships speed, velocity, agility, disruption, moving fast, and breaking things. But I'm realizing today that speed without control isn't actually speed. It's just a crash waiting to happen.
There is a really great analogy for this. Think about a Formula One race car. It is obviously designed to go incredibly fast. But the only reason the driver actually dares to go 200 miles an hour into a sharp corner is because they know they have incredibly powerful brakes.
If the brakes were shaky, they'd have to drive slow the whole time.
Exactly. The brake is the very thing that enables the speed. If you didn't have brakes, you would have to crawl along at 5 miles an hour just to survive the track. The risk watcher in your company is not the enemy of speed. They are the braking system that allows the rest of the team to drive fast with total confidence.
That is a fantastic perspective shift. The brake enables the speed. It really changes the whole dynamic of how a team operates.
It really does. It turns a conflict into a partnership.
Well, this has been a real eye-opener. I am definitely going to look at the quote-unquote negative person in my next meeting entirely differently. Just a reminder to everyone listening, this deep dive was based entirely on the Max Energy ME80 Personality Assessment Report.
It's such a fascinating system. And if you're listening to this and thinking, oh my God, that is me, I am the risk watcher,
Yeah.
hopefully you feel a little more seen and understood today.
Absolutely. Your anxiety is actually a structural superpower. If you want to dig deeper into your own profile or just understand the people you work with a bit better, you can check out the official website at www.maxenergylife.com. Or you can just search for Max Energy or Manenergy on Facebook.
It's definitely worth a deep dive. Honestly, understanding your own energy wiring basically solves half your workplace conflicts overnight.
Thanks for joining us today. Next time someone pulls the emergency brake on your big idea, maybe try saying thank you instead of rolling your eyes. Stay safe, stay curious, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.
Take care, everyone.